The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because I had just set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling light. 22 years as a structural engineer, and I still started every day the same way. Coffee, silence, 30 minutes before the world demanded anything from me. That routine ended the moment I saw the hospital's number on my screen. My son's voice was thin. He sounded like he was trying to hold something together that kept slipping through his fingers. "Dad, I need you to come. I'm at Mercy General." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys. I found him in a curtained bay in the emergency department, his left arm wrapped in a temporary splint, a cut above his eyebrow sealed with a butterfly bandage, and his face carrying the particular blankness that I recognized as shock, wearing the mask of calm. He was 23 years old, and he looked like a boy again. I pulled the chair close and sat down and just looked at him for a moment, taking inventory, making sure what I was seeing was the worst of it. "What happened?" I said. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at me. "I came home early from Mike's place, around midnight. The lights were on downstairs, which I thought was weird. I figured Mom forgot to turn them off." He paused. "I heard voices. I went upstairs. I waited." "She was in your bedroom, Dad, with someone." He stopped again, and this time the pause was longer. "It was her boss, Mr. Calloway." I had met Dennis Calloway exactly 4 times. The company Christmas party 2 years running, my wife's promotion dinner, and once by accident at a steakhouse downtown when my wife and I happened to be seated near a table he was at with colleagues. He was the kind of man who wore his wealth quietly, but made sure you noticed. The understated watch, the custom fit of his jacket, the way he spoke like every room had already agreed to listen to him. He was 58. He had a wife named Carol and 2 adult daughters whose college graduations my wife had mentioned in passing. "I told him to get out," my son said. "I told him to get dressed and get out of my father's house." He just looked at me, like I was nobody, like I was a piece of furniture that had said something surprising. My son's jaw tightened. Then 2 men came in from the hallway. I don't know where they came from. His security, I guess. One of them grabbed me before I could do anything. The other one told me to calm down. He laughed once, a short and humorless sound. I didn't calm down. I tried to get loose. The first one slammed me into the door frame, and then they put me on the ground, Dad. Like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. Like I was nothing. The splint, the cut, the shock behind his eyes. "Your mother?" I said, keeping my voice level. "Where was she during this?" He looked at the ceiling again. "She told me to stop making a scene." I sat with that for a moment. 26 years of marriage, a woman I had built a life with, raised a child with, weathered 3 recessions and 2 cross-country moves, and the death of both my parents with. And when her son was being held down on the floor of our bedroom, her instruction to him was to stop making a scene. "The men left after that," my son continued. "Calloway too. My mother came and sat next to me and said we would talk about it in the morning. I got up. I drove myself here because my wrist hurt and I wanted to make sure nothing was broken." He looked at me finally, directly. "I didn't call you right away because I didn't know what to say." "It's broken?" I asked, nodding at the splint. "Airline fracture. They're putting a proper cast on in about an hour." I put my hand on his shoulder. I told him I was glad he called. I told him I would be right back. I walked to the end of the hallway near the vending machines, and I stood there for about 2 minutes doing nothing except breathing and understanding the situation with the cold precision that had kept me functional through every professional crisis of my career. I was not the type of man who acted on the first wave of emotion. I had learned early that the first wave is for feeling. The second wave is for thinking. The third wave is for moving. By the time I walked back to my son's bay, I was on the third wave. I stayed until the cast was set and the discharge paperwork was signed. I helped my son into my car and drove him to his apartment across town. I made sure he had his medication and his phone charger and enough food in the refrigerator for a few days. I told him to lock his door. I told him I loved him. I told him I would handle everything. Then I drove home. My wife's car was in the driveway. The downstairs lights were off. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at the house I had designed the addition on myself. The house where I'd coached my son through algebra and watched him open his college acceptance letter. The house that I had signed a mortgage on with the belief that I was building something permanent. Then I got out. I had two things with me that I hadn't mentioned to my son. The first was my phone, set to record. The second was the folder I had retrieved from the locked drawer in my home office. The drawer my wife didn't know existed, which contained a copy of the prenuptial agreement we had signed before our wedding, and the private investigator's report I had quietly commissioned 6 weeks earlier when I had first noticed the pattern of late nights and deleted texts, and the particular way my wife had started holding her phone face down whenever I entered a room. I had not confronted her with the report at the time. I had not been certain enough, or perhaps I had simply not wanted to be certain, but I had prepared. An engineer's instinct. You don't ignore stress fractures and hope the structure holds. I unlocked the front door and went upstairs. She was awake, sitting up in bed with her reading glasses on and a book open in her lap, which told me everything about how rattled she was. Because my wife had not voluntarily read a book in 4 years, she looked up when I came in, and I watched her face run through 3 or 4 calculations before she settled on something that was trying to be casual and landing somewhere closer to cornered. "You went to see him," she said. "Our son has a fractured wrist," I said. I know, and I told him I was sorry. You told him to stop making a scene." I kept my voice even. I stood near the doorway with my arms at my sides, while 2 men were holding him on the floor of my bedroom. She put the book down. She took off her glasses. "It's not what you think," she said. I almost said something. I almost laughed. Instead, I reached into the folder and set the PI's report on the foot of the bed. She looked at it. She looked at me. Whatever performance she had been preparing quietly folded. 14 months, I said. Every 3rd business trip. Every late meeting. The hotel in Phoenix. The one in Charlotte. The 4-day conference in San Diego that I now understand was not a conference. I paused. "I've been patient, Linda. I gave you 6 weeks to come to me on your own. You didn't. So here we are." She started to cry. I want to be honest about this. It affected me. 26 years is 26 years, and whatever she had done, there was still a part of me that reflexively wanted to make it stop. I recognized that impulse, and I did not act on it. I waited. "He told me it was over," she said. "He told me he was going to end it. That's why tonight was supposed to be the last time I finished. I've heard that's a popular reason. You don't understand what it's been like. You're never here. You're always working. We haven't been. Linda." I said her name quietly. "Don't." She stopped. "I am not interested in an accounting of my failures right now. I'm interested in what happens next." I picked up the report and put it back in the folder. "I spoke to my attorney 3 weeks ago. The paperwork is already drafted. What I'm telling you now is that you have until noon tomorrow to arrange somewhere else to stay. My attorney will be in contact with yours by end of business Monday." She stared at me. "I also want to be clear about something else," I said. "The 2 men who put our son on the floor of this room, that's assault. I have his medical records. I have his statement. My attorney has already been informed. Whatever Dennis Calloway thinks his money protects him from, it does not protect him from that." She started to say something about it being complicated, about Calloway's legal team, about how pursuing it would only make things messier for everyone. I listened to her say those things, and I understood that she was, even now, managing his interests alongside hers. That was its own kind of information. I slept in the guest room that night, not because I was giving ground, but because I simply did not want to be in the same room with her. I lay on top of the covers in the dark and looked at the ceiling and felt the strange flatness that arrives after a long period of sustained tension finally releases. Like a cable that has been under load for months and is suddenly cut. Not relief exactly, more like silence. She was gone by 10 the next morning. She took her clothes and her jewelry and the small painting from the hallway that her mother had given her, and she left without speaking to me. I watched her car pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window, and then I refilled my coffee and sat down at the table. The next several weeks were unremarkable in the procedural sense and quietly devastating in the human one. This is the part that people don't show you. Not the confrontation, but the long administrative dismantling of a shared life. The joint accounts. The insurance policies. The question of who keeps the dog, which we ultimately resolved without a fight, because she had never really wanted him, and I had always known that. The calls from mutual friends that I screened and then stopped returning. The dinner party invitations that dried up as they always do, because coupled people are uncomfortable around the newly singular. What I had not anticipated, or perhaps what I had anticipated but had not wanted to examine, was my daughter. She was 28, living in Portland, working for a nonprofit. She and her mother had always been close in the way that mothers and daughters sometimes are. A closeness with its own language and its own history that I had always been slightly outside of. I had accepted that. I had not read it as a threat. She called me 2 weeks after Linda moved out. Dad. Her voice was careful in the way that I recognized as rehearsed. I've talked to Mom. I know you're upset. I know things have been hard, but I want you to think about what you're doing to this family. I was standing in my kitchen. I looked at the grain of the countertop. What I'm doing, I repeated. She says you blindsided her. She says you've been building a case for months without ever giving her a chance to. Her boss's security detail broke your brother's wrist, I said. A pause. Mom says it was an accident, that things got out of hand, and that she's devastated about it. Your brother has a cast on his arm. He had to take 3 weeks off work. Your mother's first instruction to him, while he was on the floor, was to stop making a scene. Those are facts that exist independent of what your mother has told you. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not saying what she did was right, my daughter said. I'm saying that 26 years is a long time, and that maybe there are things on both sides. I'm going to stop you there, I said. I'm not asking you to take a side. I'm asking you to be accurate. There was an affair of 14 months. There are hotel records and photographs and a PI's report. There's your brother's medical file. These are not competing narratives. These are documents. She was quiet. When you're ready to talk to me without the version of events you've been given, I said. I'm here. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. But I'm also not going to defend myself to my own daughter for responding to what was done to this family. I ended the call. I won't pretend that didn't cost me something. It cost me considerably. I went out to the backyard and sat in the lawn chair near the fence where the old oak tree dropped shade in the afternoon, and I sat there for a long time without doing anything. The dog came and put his head on my knee, and I scratched his ear, and the two of us stayed there until the light changed. The legal process ran its course. Dennis Calloway's attorneys attempted twice to characterize the assault on my son as mutual and minor. My attorney responded both times with the emergency room documentation, the treating physician statement, and a deposition from my son that was, by my attorney's description, composed and thorough and not easy to dismiss. Calloway settled out of court 4 months later. The amount was meaningful. My son used part of it to pay off his remaining student loans. He cried on the phone when he told me. I told him not to thank me. I told him his composure that night, his willingness to tell me exactly what happened, clearly and without exaggeration, had made everything possible. That was the truth. The divorce was finalized 7 months after Linda left. She retained her personal assets, her car, and the modest financial settlement. She did not receive the house. She did not receive a share of the business I had built on the side over the last decade, which my attorney had correctly categorized as separate property under the terms of our prenuptial agreement. The same prenuptial agreement that Linda had, apparently, told her attorney she did not believe I still had a copy of. I did not feel triumphant about this. I want to be clear about that. There is a version of this kind of story where the ending feels like a victory, where the resolution arrives with the satisfying weight of justice delivered. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name. I felt like a man who had built something over a long time and had watched it come apart, and had done the necessary work of clearing the site and was now standing in an open space that was both emptier and cleaner than it had been before. My son visited the month after the divorce was final. We grilled steaks in the backyard and watched a game and talked about his job and a woman he'd been seeing in the half marathon he was training for. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You okay, Dad?" And I said yes, and I meant it. And I think he could tell I meant it because he nodded once and went back to watching the game. My daughter called 6 months later, not the careful, rehearsed version of a call, a real one. She said she had been talking to her brother. She said she had asked her mother some questions that her mother had not answered well. She said she was sorry for the conversation we'd had, for coming to me with someone else's conclusions rather than her own. I told her the same thing I'd told her before, that I loved her and that I had not gone anywhere. She asked if she could come visit. I said of course. She came the following month. We sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours, and she asked me questions and I answered them honestly, including the ones about what I might have done differently. Because there are always things done differently in a marriage that long, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of dishonesty. She cried at one point. I let her. I didn't try to fix it or redirect it. I just stayed at the table. Before she left, she hugged me in the driveway for a long time. I thought about the last 26 years, and the 7 months before that, and the oak tree in the backyard that had been there when we bought the house, and would be there long after neither of us was. I thought about my son's voice on the phone that morning at 6:47, thin and trying to hold together. I had dropped everything and driven to him. That part, at least, I had done right. The rest I am still working out, but I am working it out on my own terms, in my own house, with my dog and my coffee and my 30 minutes of silence every morning before the world asks anything of me. That is more than I expected to have. Some days it feels like enough. Some days it feels like the beginning of something. Most days, honestly, it just feels like mine.